Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Newman Center for our third in a series of talks on ministering to the suffering. Today,
Is the downstairs one on, or is it on?
can people hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Good.
we're good. Today we're really honored and privileged to have Roxanne Storms here. Roxanne is going to talk to us about bereavement ministries and her work with that. And so if we could just give her a warm welcome.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being here on this beginning of this nice Sunday daytime. And thank you for opening up to the conversation about grief and bereavement and suffering, something that we all go through. And I would imagine that all of you here are experiencing some of those losses along the way right now, and certainly all of those that will be joining virtually, to just really take that time and reflect and honor what your own experiences are as well as we go through this. Certainly bereavement is difficult in the best of times, and we'll define a little bit about what we mean by bereavement. But then you add on the incredible, complicated layers that COVID has had, and it just makes it such a heavy, heavy journey, and the crosses that we bear. So that's what we'll talk about a little bit this morning. So I'll talk for a little bit of time, and then take some time if there are some questions, or if people want to do some sharing about their own crosses, their own journey, what has helped them, what has been supportive, what they wish might have been there, how you've supported others. And then we'll have time for questions also, about a half hour altogether. So just a little bit about me, as I got that warm welcome, so thank you for that. I do a little bit of work at Holy Spirit Church as the pastoral associate. I've been there for a few years, and so have really been able to enter in that faith-filled role of being with people as they're going through their challenges and changes and losses and their grief journey. Then I also work as a clinical therapist, and I have a specialty in grief and loss. I had coordinated the grief and loss program of Catholic Charities for about 10 years, just the most wonderful service. That had to close in 2013. But then we didn't have a grief and loss center in the St. Cloud or central Minnesota area. So I, along with a devoted crew of wonderful folks, have been working for 4 years now. We're almost ready to open for 4 years on a grief center in St. Cloud that we call the Center for Life Transitions. It's operated out of the former St. Anthony Rectory over on 24th Avenue North. And so we hope to have a place for healing and rest and connection and support, and more importantly, a place for hope, because we need hope as we go through our losses with it. So I want to start off with a little reflection that I use a lot, and in my ministry, both in the role of a faith supporter or even as a clinical therapist. Oftentimes, people will come in with just whatever that their challenges, whatever that their losses, whatever that their experiences are. And I can sit there and just to receive it, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my heart just is so expanded with compassion, but sorrow and joining and all of that. And it's like, I don't even know what to say. But it's not important. It's not important what I would have to say. And so this reflection just really opens up, and it's called a grief companion's prayer. For those of you who are on your grief journey in whatever that you are bearing now, and for those who are supporting others on their grief journey, listen to the words. See if anything strikes a chord in what you need as a grieving person, or how we can support grieving people. So this grief companion's prayer. I share with you the agony of your grief. The anguish of your heart finds echo in my own. I know I cannot enter all you feel, nor bear with you the burden of your pain. I can but offer what my love does give, the strength of caring, the warmth of one who seeks to understand the silent, storm-swept barrenness of so great a loss. This I do in quiet ways, that on your lonely path you may not walk alone. So that concept about being a grief companion, what a beautiful image that is. I can't say, as people share their losses with me, and I hope I never say, oh, I know how you feel. Or oftentimes how we say, I know exactly how you feel. But then what happens is that we tend to go into, in a very empathetic way, absolutely, but we go into sharing our own losses. Oh, when my grandmother died, when I had this job loss, when my spouse or my child or I or whatever, and it takes the focus away from the person who is sharing. So can we be those companions that just walk along? As we talk about grief, we certainly know some of those main bereavement. It so often gets just kind of focused on death. And death is a huge, devastating, sorrowful loss that comes into all of our lives at different times. And so that certainly needs to be honored. But loss is in anything, any kind of changes that we go through. And so as you reflect on your own journeys and those in your connection with your family or loved ones or friends or supports or whatever, that all of that loss through maybe relationship or health issues or memory loss or any kinds of decline or separations, and then that complicated with COVID and all of the different losses that we have experienced through COVID, especially with that isolation and needing to keep a physical distance, but oftentimes how much does that involve some of that emotional distance also in not being able to be with each other and to share and to have some of those comings together that really help, some of those rituals, the funerals. It has just been heartbreaking, as if any of you have gone through funerals, which I'm sure that you have. I've had some family members that have died, and having 10 of us gathered in a cemetery to honor this life has been really sacred. It's been a very, very sacred, very stripped away of all of the other things and getting down to the essence of being together and turning towards God and turning towards each other and looking at some of those healings. But so much has been complicated with it. And so we look at all of these different crosses that we bear. And as we go through this time of Lent, I love these reflections each week on suffering as we're going through Lent, because grief itself, what a suffering journey, what a suffering experience that can open up in some graces. And it's really hard to think of the graces of grief. But as we go through our process, and I often compare the grief journey, in that word, a journey, a path, a route that we don't have a roadmap to. We get plunked down into it, whatever that it is, if it is death or some other devastating change or a pandemic or whatever, we just kind of got plopped down into it and we don't have our bearings. We need to kind of find our footing and then to see where am I at and how do I even navigate this? I don't have a compass, I don't have a map, I don't have anything. So as I was thinking about this journey of suffering, it is so beautifully aligned with the Stations of the Cross. And so our grief journey, if we, as we do the Stations of the Cross during Lent or other times, we can hold ourselves there side by side, maybe with Jesus as he is going through. And so in looking at some of the specific things that just apply so much is even in looking at that feeling condemned. So we might have felt condemned by the pandemic or condemned by a diagnosis of cancer or by isolation or job loss or whatever that it might be. And then what are some of those crosses? So Jesus picked up his cross and carrying that heavy, heavy weight. And so those crosses of grief that accompanied us in so many different ways. The actual loss itself is such a cross. But then oftentimes in grief, it takes us a while to come into and kind of recognize what we call secondary losses or invisible losses. So if you think even in looking at the pandemic in general, so some of those secondary losses that maybe are just really apparent, but that loss of relationship, of connection, of being able to be in person. I brought communion to some folks this morning, and one of the women was saying she was just literally, she was like Claire at Mass today. She was just quivering with joy, actually, because she said, today, so after a year, today I get to see my daughter and I get to hug my grandchildren. She has not hugged her grandchildren for almost a year. And so those losses of that, all of those different connections, or being together, being at a table, sharing bread, all of that. As I pulled into the parking lot this morning, I was listening on the radio, and there was a psychologist who was talking about how are we going to come back out of this pandemic. And we think that the hardest thing is being in it, but we don't even recognize the impacts that it's been taking, and how are we going to readjust? And saying, even as we found creative ways of being together virtually through family time or shared meal time, even virtually, or playing games or things like that, she said that she's noticed that we are tending, because we've been so programmed now for almost this year, of losing eye contact. What a loss. I didn't even think of that as a grief experience of a loss. And so as we come back into some in-person interactions and things, it's just going to be that uncomfortableness, maybe, of even looking at people in the face, or looking at them without their mouths covered and seeing the full face and having to reinterpret what facial expressions are and things. So all of these different crosses that, like Jesus, we have not had a choice about taking up, because they're just there. And then what happens? So certainly on our grief journey and through life, that example of Jesus taking up his cross. He fell. He fell, and he fell, and he fell. And so we would love it to be our grief journey. We would love it to be this straight path forward, and all right, this is it. I'm going to shoulder it, and I'm going to brace, and I know it's going to be hard, and okay, I'm doing better, and now I'm getting there. Oh, thank goodness, and literally, thank God, I'm over it. We're going to fall. We fall along the way into sadness, into despair, into maybe hopelessness, into being overwhelmed, into that loss of trust or belief that things are going to get back to how we want it, because we only want it to get back to how it was. I want to get back to normal. How many times have we said that during the pandemic or do other things that we've gone through? We want it to get back to normal, and it doesn't. Whatever that change has been, we are changed. And so we can get back to familiarity, but we're never going to be the same. We can grow, and that might be one of those graces of grief, is coming more into compassion or empathy or healing or whatever, but we can't get back into normal. And so knowing that. So as companions of those in grief, we can support them. Maybe we're going to be the Simon who literally comes and helps it do something, lift something. Maybe it's some actual physical things that we can help out with. And that is such a great thing for those in grief, to know that others are there, that they're not walking alone. Or maybe it's Veronica, just being there, wiping the brow, wiping the face, holding the tears, keeping the presence. Or the women of Jerusalem that are on the way. What did they do? They weren't the ones that physically helped lift up the cross. They weren't literally wiping the brow of Christ, as we are all Christ carrying our crosses. They stood, and as I looked back into my Stations books, those who can weep with us for a while. And then the refrain, the line in that is, let me join with you in grief. How often do we say, my thoughts and prayers? My thoughts and prayers are with you, or just thinking of you. Any of those extensions, those are lifelines. They are literally lifelines on this journey to somebody in grief, to know that they're not forgotten, that they're not alone, that they're not left behind. Christ was stripped of his garments. Grief strips us of so much. It strips us at times of our strengths, and it can strip us of our faith. It can deepen our faith. It can have us grow stronger and turning to our faith, and it can also have us questioning why. I was with somebody last night, and a 20-some-year-old who was having so much physical pain and depression and other things, and literally said, why would God want me to go through this? It strips us and it brings us down to the essence. And so God doesn't want us to suffer. But God knows that suffering is a part of what our journey is to get to that salvation, to get to past the nailing on the cross to the resurrection. But God joins us in our sufferings. But getting down to being stripped and feeling so, so vulnerable. And oftentimes in grief, we just feel so defenseless with that. And then at times we feel like we're being nailed to the cross. And even Jesus said, what have I done? Why have you forsaken me? And opening up. And that's where we can allow ourselves and others to help fill us with faith, with companionship, with others to be there so that we can make it through our journey. We don't get to closure, but we get to healing. And healing happens. Healing deepens us, increases our compassion, increases our reverence for the gift of life when struggles aren't as hard, and can support us so that we can be companions to others. Oftentimes, companions just struggle with, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know. Y'all say the things at the beginning of, oh, I'm so sorry. Let me know if there's anything you can do. Let me know how I can help. Those are all just such wonderful, wonderful gestures. But what it does, though, is it puts the burden on the griever. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what it's going to be like. They don't know what the experiences are. They don't know how they're going to handle it or what they're going to need or some things like that. And so I think it's important to say those things, to offer that, but then also to recognize, what can we offer? What can I do? I can pray for you. I think about you. I could send you a card. I could pick up some groceries. Do you need help with snow blowing? What about, so both Simon's and Veronica's, we can find different ways. And then in looking at even those words, sometimes we don't know what to say because we're so afraid we're going to say the wrong thing. We put platitudes out there, and that can help. We want it to provide that comfort, but oftentimes that can feel trite. So I did bring a handout along in case anybody wants it, or to have available for anybody that is joining virtually. Finding the right words. Just some suggestions of some ways that we might phrase some things that could feel a little off-putting as a companion to those in grief. And then also what some things might be more helpful. And it's kind of in some different categories. So it looks at, how often do we tell them, be strong. God doesn't give you any more that you can handle. You need to be strong like your whatever relationship or things. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Be faithful. This was part of God's plan. You need to pray more. Some of those things. Maybe we're not saying these in these exact words, but sometimes it can come out that way. Be positive, asking why. Why didn't you? Why do you think God is putting me through this? What that young person said last night. Do comparisons. Some have it harder. Instead of saying, you should feel lucky that you had him for so long, or you should feel lucky that you were in this position, or whatever it might be. It might be. It's never long enough, is it? We had a wonderful couple at Holy Spirit. They were so faith-filled and so faith and devoted to each other. Married for 75 years, side by side for 75 years. What a gift, what a lifetime. As he died, wife, what she would give for one more day, seeing him in his chair, seeing him there. So ways that we can be open, that we can be these companions, that we can walk with each other on our journey of suffering. I'm thinking, is that about the time? It's a little after 11. Anybody have any thoughts or any questions or anything that has been helpful to them?
It is said that grief is neither a sign of weakness or lack of faith, but the price we pay for love.
Is it?
And,
Yeah.
It's really a relief to do what you need to do, and we all grieve differently. Okay, I don't try to compare among people. So I do appreciate, the clarity that you've brought into it, and very insightful points. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. So many critical things that you noted just right there, that we as grievers, what do we want? Well, first of all, we don't want to go through it. We want it to be over. And then we want to be strong. And so anything that seems like weakness or vulnerability, it is so hard to open ourselves up to that, of course. But tears or wailing, I love the wailing, gnashing of teeth. I just remember at certain times, so my mom died 3 years ago, and we were with her for 10 weeks as she's going through the dying process. And so I had that time to prepare. And knowing that she was such a faith-filled woman, and she said many times, I'm not afraid to die, but to watch her suffering, and then to come to that last moment when she took that last breath and being there. So here I am as a grief therapist, right? And a bereaved daughter. And so I remember weeks and months, and even to this day, times when grief can just come up and overwhelm and just flow through. And there were times when I was just doubled over, just sobbing, just missing my mom so much. And I am thinking in my head, I'm like, I'm never going to get over this. And I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah, you will. No, it doesn't feel like it. Yeah, you will. I'm like, but holding that and just needing to allow that wailing and gnashing of teeth as it came. And as we go through this grief journey, if we're thinking about it as a path or traveling through woods or meadows or trees or on the ocean or whatever it might be, thinking those hills or those waves that just come crashing over, if we can go with that, we can ride with those waves. What do? We try to stuff it. We try to push our way through it. Okay, that doesn't work when there's a tidal wave. You can't stand against that and push your way through it. But if we can look at coming into it and riding with it, then we go through that turmoil, and it does settle out. It does ease. It does get gentler. It doesn't go away, but it softens. And so now, 3 years past my mom's passing, or my brother's, or my niece, or my mom's sister that died 16 days before my mom did, or my nephew that died a year to the day after, or things. Now, most of those are gentler. They're softer. And so it comes into some of that missing, but not that overwhelming bereavement response with it. other things that you said certainly is that, yes, we all need to grieve according to our grief print, which is kind of like our thumbprint. What's going to be right for one person is not necessarily going to be right for another. And so finding things that do work, because what do we hear most often in grief that people say to us in trying to be very helpful is, you should get out, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should what. We get shoulded to death, and in grief we actually have this adage that we say, don't should on me. And hopefully for yourselves, don't should on yourselves. And I need to say that very carefully, especially, but that we hold ourselves up and others with these expectations about what it should look like with it. I have a really, this is not unique to me, but a really visual way of kind of finding out not just what works for me individually or works with any of us as individuals, but there's some things that are called like grief styles. So it's not making comparisons, but what is your style? What's your style of expression? Not just in grief, but in other things, in joy or in regular times or whatever. And we can, they're pretty self-explanatory. So I'll put it out there and see if you can identify where you're at, and then we'll go through it a little bit. I used to compare it to, no matter if it was men or women in the area, are you a Martha or are you a Mary? We know what those mean, right? Okay. So both in their personality and their responses, you all know, all right, if you're online, identify yourself. Who's a Martha? Who's a Martha in this area? I'm such a Martha, kind of a deal. Being back in the kitchen and doing things and getting it all ready and everything and preparing. What's Mary doing? Mary's sitting. She's sitting at the feet of Jesus. She's just there. She's not. Doesn't she know all of the stuff that needs to be done? Okay, so our general temperament, but in grief. We see this in the story of Lazarus when Jesus is coming. Martha and Mary, true to their natures, had very different grief responses. Martha ran out to meet Jesus. Why? Why weren't you here? Martha's the active griever externally. Why weren't you there? Mary, grieving just as much for her beloved brother, but grieving in a different way, in a different style. So you can look at it as either a Martha or Mary, or here's another way is styles of life, but especially in styles of grief. Are you a head griever? A heart griever? A hand griever? Head, heart, hand. All three very, very authentic, very deep, very healing styles of processing. One is not better than the other. It is not a comparison. It's a different response. So in grief, like in any other emotion that we go through or experience, we all have the same variety of feelings. Sadness and loneliness and missing and anger and loneliness and depression or anxiety or whatever that it might be. We all have those to different degrees. How do we express that? So heart grievers, you might determine, heart grievers are more emotionally expressive through their words, through journaling, through whatever, want to talk, want to share, need to put things out there. Maybe they're the ones that cry or that they just do this emotional external expression in whatever way. That's a heart griever. That's not everybody. How often do we say to people, you just need to cry. You just need to let it out. You just need to release that. Hand grievers aren't going to necessarily cry. And if they do, they're not going to cry in front of others. The two couple of the safest, the greatest places for most of us to grieve, but especially hand grievers to grieve, are where? What would you think?
In the kitchen.
In the kitchen, yeah, maybe chopping and getting things out and stuff, and doing something. And especially if you're cutting up onions, it can be that reason for the tears to come. Yeah, but for those tears with hand grievers, maybe it's in the shower or in the bathroom, in the car. I had a woman who said that she would schedule her grieving time right before, this was pre-pandemic, before kids came back from school, she would go into the closet, and she'd go way back in the corner of the closet, and she would wail. She was a very private griever, but found those ways to let it out. So hand grievers, maybe in the kitchen or chopping wood or running or listening to music or cleaning or whatever kinds of things, they're more task-based. But as they're doing this, they might be the organizers. They might be the ones who, for death, put funeral things in place and go through and sort out. And we got to get those thank you notes written, and it's got to. Okay, so some of that might be hand-based. That's their way of getting that outlet for the emotions, kinds of things. And they might not cry externally that we can see. And it does not mean that they're not grieving deeply. They're grieving in a different way. Head grievers. Could be that, they're rationalizing and things, but it doesn't have to be. It's not a denial of grief. I just need to go inside. I just need to process. I just need to be. I need to sort it out in my head, down into my essence with it. Or maybe they're readers and they take in that information or listening to things or whatever. I tend to find that I'm much more of a head griever. But we all need some of those other outlets. We need a couple of safe places, safe people that we can express it to, that we can have them as our companions on our journey, wherever that we're at. We need some outlets to get things out physically and just to take care. So the greatest thing that I could say to you in grief, wherever that you are on your own grief journey, honor what you need. You will know. You will know. So often we question and we doubt because we get this certain image about how we're supposed to grieve. Be strong, everything. But no. Be aware, though, that grief hits us holistically. Body, mind hits you physically in the chest area and stomach and headaches and concentration and things like that. It's going to hit you emotionally. We know that. Spiritually, might find comfort. But church is one of the hardest places to be when you're in grief. All of that familiarity. What are people going to say? Or they're looking at me, or I just feel like I'm on the spot. And the music and the scripture and the prayers and lighting the candle and all of that, it can so much offer comfort, but it also takes us into that emotion. And so being aware of that how it hits us spiritually, how it hits us socially, all of that, the different ways that grief manifests. And if you are a companion to somebody, hold the space. Just hold the space as much as you can. We don't need to say, we don't need to have the right words, but tell me about, what is this like for you? How are you doing? What do you need right now? Right now, what do you need right now? Because I don't know what I'm going to need next week or tomorrow or so. Right now, what do you need? I don't know. I just need to be here. Okay, I can be here with you. If it is in person, if it's virtually, if it's over the phone, if it's in prayer, if it's in whatever way, kind of a thing. On the other side of this handout that I have, there's just some scripture that offers strength and hope. So we can turn to things like this, but all we need to do is open up our hearts to this. Good. So, thoughts or questions or other things?
My mother died in 1990, and I'm not over her. I'm still grieving.
Do you want to just repeat that, Roxanne, for people who
Yeah.
are going to see it later?
So just very courageously shared. His mother died in 1990 and not over it, still grieving. We don't ever think, or we don't tell people, stop loving. Stop loving. No. We know that love has no end. Love changes, love deepens, love might change and shift in things, but we don't want people to stop loving in that authentic way. And grief is that other side of love. It is the thorn with the rose. It's what comes with love, what comes with relationship, what comes with connection. And so, no, we don't. The hard news of grief but then there's good news. We don't get over. We don't get closure. Our society tells us we need to move on. We need to get beyond. We need to get to the end, the finish line. We need to get to closure. There is no closure in grief. The good news, there is healing. There is softening. That relationship continues. And so, yes, to literally, what did we hear today? Honor your mother and father. It didn't say honor them until they die. It's honor your mother and father. Honor each other. Honor what those intangible losses, those connections, those items that bring meaning because of the relationship. Honor the relationship and find healing and solace.
Let us thank Roxanne so much. If you have a question or comment for Roxanne afterwards, we'd be happy to stay, right?
Yes.
Yes, so she'll be happy to be around, but thanks so much, Roxanne. Bless you.